Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Not So Civil Engineers. I'm your host, Sam Moriarty.
And I'm Maggie Rodriguez. And today we have a guest with us named Jessica Wilder. She is my old coworker from Camp Lejeune in North Carolina. And she is also a close friend of mine. So welcome, Jessica.
Thanks. Thanks for having me, you guys. I'm excited.
Today, we are going to be talking about collaboration across disciplines. So, Jess has a really interesting background as a facility planner. Really, this cross of different disciplines and industry, from engineering to leadership, there's a lot of decisions that you help facilitate, even if you're not necessarily doing the work itself. So, we're really excited to hear from you today about that and how you've handled and navigated that collaboration.
Our guest, Jessica Wilder, is a professional engineer. Did all that work to get the PE in mechanical engineering. Big props to Jess. I know how much work that was, and I know how much work the application was as well, because I got to witness it firsthand on her couch in North Carolina while she submitted the application frantically before her wedding so that it would be in her maiden name.
The things that women engineer will do so that their husbands don't get credit. Yes. Yes. With my background, undergrad in biomedical engineering, master's in engineering management, I work in project management. What the heck FE and PE do I take? And when I graduated from undergrad, I had no intention of ever taking either test. But again, with the timeline of COVID, I decided to take the FE before I started my job just to get one more thing done. I've been in school. I'm used to it. Let's just get it over with. The test is like $100. Thank God, passed on the first try. I just took the other disciplines exam for the FE. But when it came time for the PE, I'm like, what? I don't fit in any of these categories. That's not what I do every single day. So as one does, I chose the test that I felt like I could teach myself the most in the shortest amount of time. And I chose to do it in mechanical engineering in the machine design, just because I had done a lot of master's level work of material science, and that it fits into that category. It's something I'm interested in. It's something I enjoy learning about. So that's what I decided to get my PE in, which in the state of North Carolina, it doesn't matter what you take it in. You can practice in whatever you feel like is your expertise. And I don't feel like I will see myself in a position to stamp any drawings anytime soon. I feel so grateful that those test results last for life. So,
oh yeah,
I actually took the test twice. So I took it the first time and I did not pass. And, they give you a metric chart of how close you are. And it was like one or two questions in every category. And I was like, you know what? I'm so used to studying. I'm just going to schedule the test for 3 months from now. I'm just going to grind it out. And I did, and I passed it the second time, even though the test it felt like 10 times harder and completely different sections that they're testing you on. But I honestly think that there's a test out there for everybody, and you can do it. You just have to be disciplined enough to put forth the effort to study, because it's so different than actual industry work. But I will say that was one of the biggest benefits of marrying an engineer is like Morgan is a mechanical engineer, and he's like stereotypical engineering introvert, works in a cube farm with his headphones, doesn't talk to anybody. Here I am. I'm like, hi, I'm Jessica. How are you today? And it's like his worst nightmare to talk to people all day, which is all I do. And when I was studying, he had taken machine design courses and I hadn't. So I could just, ask him, what do you remember about this? And so being able to have conversations like that was really, really helpful. But then it also runs into like, okay, how do we, take apart our dishwasher because we want to replace each individual component? I'll just pull out my soldering iron and let's go in the garage and try and fix it. I'm like, can we really not afford a new dishwasher?
Cannot afford a new dishwasher. Have to solder it.
Not in federal employment.
In this economy.
Right.
So Jess, we know you're a facility planner, but can you tell us and the audience a little bit about your education and your career background?
Yeah, I grew up in a small 2-stoplight town. I decided to go into engineering school, but when I went into school, I was already a year ahead. So I came in, and you go right into statics. And you're like, oh my God, what have I done? You know, I know absolutely no one. I went to East Carolina University, so it's a smaller engineering school. When I started, they had only been an engineering school for maybe 10 years. It's a very general engineering program. I have a general engineering degree with a concentration in biomedical engineering. And so really that first year is true in the trenches engineering school. You're in statics, you're in physics, you're trying to learn people, but I'm with all the sophomores, so I don't know anybody. I'm trying to figure out group projects, you know, typical engineering school. I was able to network, and I got an internship that summer after my freshman year, and I worked at a pharmaceutical company. There really wasn't a whole lot to do, but they were just kind of throwing all these random things at us. We worked to come up with a new inventory system for their big warehouses. We learned about pharmaceutical processes. I worked all through college, so I had multiple part-time jobs, paying rent, and to do all of that. And I joined a sorority. Like I'm trying to make friends and have the college experience. And the type of person I'm never going to say no to an opportunity. I'm just doing as much as I possibly can and like burning myself out every chance I get. And so my second year, because of my first internship with a pharmaceutical company, I got another internship, and this was as a project engineer for another pharmaceutical company in Eastern North Carolina. That one was a much more like regulated program, but it kind of opened my eyes to capital projects. Like I got to get on the roof of the building and we got to evaluate the HVAC system. I was able to create drawings for the first time. Like they had no record drawings of like where the valves were in the ceiling for like multiple gases going to the chemistry lab. So here I am, an intern, you know, popping ceiling tiles with the maintenance guy, trying to figure out where the heck they are. And so I was getting all this exposure to large sums of money and having different vendors bid for an HVAC replacement. And I was like, this is actually super interesting. But by the time I'm completed with sophomore year, I have done 3 of the 5 required classes to get this concentration in biomedical engineering. The next year, I ended up getting a public service funded internship, and it was a project management intern this time. And it was actually doing renovations of low-income houses, basically taking these families' homes that were built in the 60s and 70s and pulling out the carpet in the bathrooms, putting grab bars in the showers, and doing a lot of things that can maintain accessibility. And I was like, wow, there is a whole world outside of biomedical engineering. And going into senior year, I wasn't committed to going into design. I just didn't feel the draw. And I kept running into this thing at career fairs that because I've labeled myself on my resume as biomedical, no one wants to talk to me. And so no one really wants to interview me for any general things. They don't want to do anything mechanical. They don't want to do anything electrical, even though I'm interested in everything. And so I'm like, okay, well, how can one possibly correct themselves? They get a master's degree. So I finished my senior year, I'm dragging my feet, haven't applied to any jobs. Like I really just didn't think that going into industry was the thing for me. Applied to grad school. So I have a Master of Engineering with a concentration in engineering management from NC State University. It's 5 classes of business engineering classes, a lot of product and program development and business oriented discussion, and then 5 master's level classes in whatever I wanted to learn about. It was fun to have the flexibility to kind of deeper dive into topics that I found interesting. And one of those was facility management and planning. I did the Disney College program in Florida, like a month after I graduated from East Carolina. And to rationalize me going to make $10 an hour, pushing buttons on a roller coaster for 9 months, I'm, getting this master's degree at the same time. So it's not a total waste of my time, but I'm like, I'm never going to have an opportunity to do something like this where you push off being an adult for that much longer. I really went to do the Disney College program because it is one of the ways that you can get a foot in the door to do a professional internship with Disney. Disney is one of those companies from the engineering side. You can only really get a job there if you already work for the company or you are one of those like pipeline universities that they have a real well-known like repertoire with. So I worked at Space Mountain for 9 months and I absolutely loved it. I have the blueprints hung up in my office now because I just love it so much. While I was there, I got to participate in this Disney Engineering Day, and it was basically anybody who had said that they had gone to engineering school or were interested in engineering school or anything like that. And when I signed up for it, I don't even know that I knew what even it was, but it was so cool. We got to go like behind the scenes of multiple rides. And I don't know if you guys have been to Disney. I'm a totally Disney person, but there's an Avatar ride where you like ride a banshee, and like we got to go behind the scenes on that ride, and like we went into the room that had the huge computer that was controlling everything, and it was just mind-boggling, like just the amount of stuff that goes into it. We end up doing this like group project thing, and I'm like, I'm out of school, I really am not up
and
to
then let me
speed.
guess, you like led a team.
I literally won an award. I won an award for the best project management.
On brand.
And I'm like, okay, that's great, but like I didn't even know we were having to do math today.
Yeah.
And after that, I actually got contacted by one of the people that have the professional internships, and they said, hey, we saw that you did really well in this, engineering exploration day. Are you interested in extending your college program and transitioning over to a professional internship? And I was like, absolutely, I am. This is the whole reason I moved to Florida. I started in January of 2020 down in Florida. Day one, it was anything you think that a Disney engineering internship is, plus more. Like, I'm talking, we work third shift to walk roller coasters that were down for maintenance, where you're seeing the animatronics half dressed because they need to replace parts, doing safety walks first thing in the morning because they're having to repair a concrete slab overnight. And like, Disney is one of those places that the guests walk out of the gate and they immediately bring in construction crews, and it has to be open the next morning. But then here comes March 2020, and we work at a theme park. And so like the morning that we had heard the news that, COVID is sweeping and closing everything, we just report to work like normal. And they're like, why are you here? We're like, because like we had a meeting this morning, like we were up at 5 a.m. to go to Cinderella's castle. And they're like, well, we're closing for 2 weeks because of COVID-19, whatever that is. And I was like, well, if we're closing for 2 weeks, I'm packing my car and I'm going to North Carolina. I miss my family. I ended up working from home for a couple of weeks, and then I got laid off about a month later. And, that was one of those things. It's like, your dream job is in your hands and it's just taken from you. And, it is what it is. I mean, it put me on the path. I would do it the same exact way again. Disney is like a self-governing company to their land, so they self-regulate, if you will. They make their own rules, and it's a really cool thing because it's like, where on earth can you find somewhere to work where they basically self-govern? I'm never going to find it ever again. Well, flash forward until August of that same year, I applied to a facility planner position at a Marine Corps installation in North Carolina that was doing the same exact thing that I was doing at Disney. It was just for the Marine Corps. And it's very much the same exact thing. It's just, you can't pay more money to get things done faster. But that's just federal service for you in general.
When you were in Florida, was Morgan back in North Carolina chilling?
So yes, like side part of the story is me and my now husband started dating when I was a junior and he was a senior. He was 3 months from graduation when we started dating. So you're like, well, where's this gonna go? And being a year older, he went straight into the industry and I still had a year left of school. And then I'm like, okay, we've been dating a year. We still don't really know where this is going to go.
So tell us a little bit about your role now and your responsibilities and what your role involves.
On paper, my title is a general engineer, and we kind of use this unofficial title of a facility planner just because I work in the planning section of the Public Works Department. We write the military construction projects from the moment we identify that there's a need for one, and then we brief it to leadership year after year and liaison between the actual end user of the building to kind of carry it through design and then develop. And then we support all through solicitation, the technical evaluation boards actually awarding the project, and then we support everything after we award to a construction contractor. All RFIs and submittals that need to go to the base, we manage all of that all the way until the project is complete, and then we turn it over, and then the cycle basically starts back over.
You're basically like a liaison for everyone involved in capital projects, renovations, all of that. Who would you say you collaborate with most on a day-to-day basis?
I would say a lot of my interactions from a day-to-day is really with the customer. For my specific definition with federal work, my customer are the Marine Corps units specifically. So a lot of interaction with active duty, but because I'm a rep for anybody who's considered a stakeholder, I also represent a lot of the base engineers and the base maintenance staff, or am working to kind of get a solution that will work for the A&E firm that's designing. That is kind of my day-to-day.
So clarification for our listeners, A&E team is architect and engineering team. So Jessica was a planner and I was a construction manager when we worked on the same base. She worked for the Marine Corps, I worked for the Navy, but we were on projects together. It was really interesting because a lot of the things that we were meant to do kind of overlapped. So luckily, Jessica and I worked really well together. We got along really well. Planners on other projects, we kind of just were not on the same page. And it would get confusing about who was responsible for what. And if you have a planner who's not really pulling their weight, there's enough plausible deniability to be like, oh, well, I thought you were doing that. And so having that good collaboration is so important, because even if there is something that you can't get done or that isn't your job as a planner, communicating it proactively and actually like collaborating about what is whose was so important. But some people just didn't really do that.
Yes, I think that's one of the things that's really complicated about the way that my section is organized. Ideally, the staff is half engineers and half like a multidisciplinary liaison. So a lot of the ones that we hired either have some sort of formal planning experience so they can provide insight that we may not have otherwise. And then we also have someone that came over from environmental, so they have another perspective. So we can use those to make our team more well-rounded and also provide perspective. It's nice to have a multifunctional team to help break some of that down. But the thing about having non-engineers involved in construction is they're just not thinking about things the way that engineers do. And engineers in general typically have a knack for problem solving. I try to push my staff of engineers to really a little bit more. We can be this conduit and pass through of information, and you don't have to learn anything at all. But what are you going to gain in your professional career if you're not pushing your own boundaries to learn more and to be a better advocate for not only yourself, but for the team on the base? So
how many people are you managing these days?
We have a team of 5, but we've had some turnover. The staff should be about 8 planners with 1 supervisor. Ish.
Jessica and I were both there, and neither of us had any intentions of leaving North Carolina. We had this whole scheme we were coming up with about which role she could end up with, which role I could end up in, so that we could work in the same office. But obviously things changed.
Right. And we have like all of my, I would say like closer engineering female friends have now like moved to different states. And so now I'm like, okay, the only other one is my subordinate. And I really would love to be actual friends, but I have this such professional wall with my employees that I'm like, I really don't need to know anything about your personal life, but I enjoy you personally.
Was that like someone who was there when I was there?
No, She's only been here for a year or so, but like, honestly, I hope she stays around for a very long time, and hopefully that I'm not her supervisor.
It's so crazy that like so many people have come and gone there, because that base used to be like everyone who worked there is there for life, like is local, right, is planning on staying forever. But I feel like there was that big boom of construction following Florence, and now there are a bunch of like people who are kind of in and out.
Yeah, I mean, what's crazy is like I just passed my 5-year anniversary here, And it's like we're just finishing the buildings that we were designing when I first started, which is crazy that it's taken that long, but it's really not surprising when you think of just the massive surge of construction that's happening locally in the area. There's just not the support from the local subcontractor teams to be able to do that magnitude of work in such a localized area that they're just going to have to pick and choose which jobs that they're going to go to, and they're going to go to the ones that pay more. So the nature of the beast.
Yeah, that was such a struggle there. So, we're talking a little bit about some of the tensions that might exist between people when you don't communicate effectively or when you aren't on the same page. We deal with a lot of that, especially in the construction industry, with which Jess and I are both in, and just in engineering in general. So let's talk a little bit about when you have different constraints, different guidelines, but the same goal, and kind of how we can bring those things together to meet the goals that we have in projects.
So one of the things that we consistently run into from the planning perspective, not only do we manage these projects, but we also manage the actual requirements. So the federal government is very regulated in how much space you're allowed to build for somebody. There's a calculation for everything, and it's standardized, and that's ideally good because that means it's auditable. Just because we're funded by taxpayer dollars. So when we create these projects, there's a requirement associated with it. And basically we come up with this, 25,000 square foot box. And then we say that 25,000 square foot box can meet this unit's mission. And so really, once you get to the point where you're actually needing to design is like when you take into consideration all other building codes, whether that be local or federal. And that's where tensions really start to have a play, because all of these different types of disciplines are essentially competing for space. And at the end of the day, we are there to do the mission of the Marine Corps unit, but elevators have to be a certain size, stairs have to be a certain size, mechanical, electrical rooms, they have to be safe. So that's kind of where we run into, and I feel like architects are kind of the ones that really kind of get twisted about it. So, these designers are trying to like teeter the line of what they can and can't get away with. But I'm like, you cannot go over that number. Like you cannot. It is against the law. Architects really have a hard time with that. It has to be a usable, functional building for the end user, but we have to meet all of these extracurricular codes and things, if you will.
The only people who can inflate the number are special operations commands. Am I right, Jessica? You do not have to comment if you don't want to.
So there have been a couple of instances where we have had to go back to Congress and say, hey, when we wrote this project, 3 years ago, we had no idea that the requirements were going to change. There's been a couple of buildings where the requirements did change and they had a need for, 2,000 to 5,000 more square footages into the building. And we were able to supplement. It's kind of the nature of the beast. Everyone knows that the government moves very, very slowly. So it's always the disheartening part when we get to the end of a job and we turn around and they've got to do a renovation to a brand new building because it's not meeting their need. But in their mind, they're like, it's brand new, it should work. But we really wrote the document that created this building 8 years ago. And
because for anyone who doesn't know, government funding is requested 3 years ahead of a project getting the funding. So you've got 3 years and then usually about a year, let's say, of design. And then 3 to 5 in construction.
So one of the questions that I have then is, what if those standards change?
Typically there's like some point where it's kind of a cutoff that if you've gotten authorization for design under certain standards, you can proceed under those. Jessica, you can probably clarify better.
Yes. So if there's a standard that's in place prior to actually awarding of the construction contract, it depends on like what type of contract we're talking about too. If it's a design build and the standard comes out prior to award to a construction contractor, basically that's the date. If the date is prior to the award, then they're responsible for it. If not, it'll end up resulting in a change order. The government in general feels like there's a benefit to the government or there's a cost savings. Usually not the case, but sometimes it is the case.
Mm-hmm. For like design with building codes and things, there's always like a buffer time after a code comes out where it's not enforced straight away. and then it's enforced at a certain point. So you just have to know when it's going to be enforced and when you have to comply with a new code or regulation or anything like that.
So I work in healthcare, right? And I think of the healthcare standards and specifically around the NFPA 99, and that, for a really long time we have been operating under the 2012 version, but there is a 2021 version that's out, and other institutions are following that. And I can't speak to the exact changes in the standards, but it does make me think about construction and just how quickly standards can change because there's some new risk that was identified.
Oh yeah, and there were times in projects on the base where standards would come out or codes would change and we would have to modify the contracts to enforce the new things, and we would have to pay extra to the construction companies or to the designers or both to bring them up to that standard.
And one other thing that we try to do to get ahead of it is locally we'll have our own set of standards and guidance, which we kind of control the time frame with our own staff of when we want things to be updated. So if we know there's a known problem and then we know we're going to award 3 projects next year, hey, let's go ahead and address the 10 problems we had this year in the guidance that we have next year. And those typically are more stringent, but allow us to work within the codes, but just tailored to us locally, because a lot of the criteria that we have to design to are not local. They're, enterprise-wide, if you will, for both the Marine Corps and the Navy.
And the engineering team at Camp Lejeune was pretty proactive. Like there were times when they did like a program-wide contract change to bring things up to a standard that wasn't actually required yet, but was something that we all just kind of needed to see as the new norm because it was coming. So they were a pretty proactive team and pretty much had their finger on the pulse of everything.
Yeah, I will say it's kind of interesting because the Florence program kind of put us in a position to learn so much at one time that we wouldn't have learned all of that over 20 years, and we learned it in 2.
And the Florence program, for everybody who's not aware, is what I worked for. It was like a temporary command on Camp Lejeune. So it wasn't the normal construction command on the base because there was a massive amount of damage done during hurricane. There was a massive amount of damage done during Okay, trial 3.
One more time.
Yes, there was a massive amount of damage done to facilities during Hurricane Florence. I only said it wrong twice. Not only like damaging buildings directly, but mold and just a lot of problems. And so in order to handle the massive influx of work that was going to happen, they established a second construction command on the base that was a 5-year command. And they had to bring in tons of people to be able to handle those projects. It was like a $5 billion, probably $6 billion by the end of it, dollar program, all happening at the same time. So it was really intense. And that's where I worked. And that was not the norm for the base. That operation is not the norm for the military. It's happened like a handful of times. So it really pushed everybody to their limits.
Yes. So when I started, it was about a year into, well, I guess probably not a year into, like I think all the design build contracts had been awarded within the previous 6 months. So, I'm right into the surge of, hey, we're designing 30 buildings at one time. It is normal for us to do 1 a year. And then to do 30 at the same exact time was overwhelming for everyone involved. Mm-hmm. And really the lens that I have is only new construction. So anything that's like bright, shiny, and new, or a consolidation of existing uses. That doesn't even count what was going on the renovation side for buildings that we deemed that you could still inhabit. That was a whole other department that was managing that stuff. So I truly still to this day, I'm like, how do we do that? But I know how we did, because we put in rules that like we could not have multiple design reviews on the same day because people could not physically be in 2 places at the same time. Mm-hmm. And planning really tried to actually have participation from the end users and stakeholders all across the base.
Yeah, it was intense, but
still
learned a lot. You learned a lot. We all learned a lot.
Yeah, we really did so much in a span of 5 years. And we didn't have a precedent that was realistic in our hands. And I feel like that was the case for a lot of the stuff that the money was available now. We just had to make the decisions that we could at the time. And then during award, we also awarded certain buildings that like for units that like no longer exist in the Marine Corps. So that was also added complication throughout the program. But again, it was very unprecedented times.
In more ways than one.
Yes, in very many ways. We all say that we would never wish for that magnitude of storm to come to Eastern North Carolina, but we got a lot of projects that we would have never gotten for 20 years. I think we're all the better for it in some ways, as far as like the stakeholders standpoint. Like we know what we want and we have better standards now, but it wasn't some loss of some other things and sanity at times.
Yeah. Like I got to manage a church, a headquarters building, a special operations training building, a drawbridge, a 45-mile long rail line. It was insane. It was just like an insane variety of projects. It was like everything was touched. It was nuts.
You guys are like Monopoly.
Yeah.
This is just a like game of Monopoly. We got the railways, we got the post office.
They should make a like Monopoly Camp Lejeune.
It's so funny because the last time that there was a program this large was in 2009. And it's like to Maggie's point earlier, where it's like all the people that were here in the past 5 years, like we're here in 2009. So they'll be like, oh, well, this is what we did back in 2009. I'm like, okay, well, we have like lived so much life between that. You're saying you're going to treat this the same way you did in 2009?
Guys, I was in elementary school.
Right. Like we really need to have some new perspective here. Things can change a little bit, but that's just, I feel like the nature of being very young in the industry too.
Oh yeah. So we're talking a lot about end users and collaboration with them and helping them to understand the process of why things are the way they are. But can you share an example of a time where the end users made a request that significantly changed a design?
Yeah, so it pretty much happens in every single project I would say that we had. But again, we were doing things in such an accelerated time frame that there was not a whole lot of time to go through with a fine-tooth comb about exactly what these buildings required. But one example that I will give that I hope we never ever do again it was not even the occupant of the new building, but it was the installation commander at the time designing this building. They did not like the orientation of the building because it's a very prominent building. It was in a very high vis area, and they did not like the way that the building was oriented because it wasn't grand enough. And so they wanted to kind of shift like a 15-degree like offset, and it cost us a very large sum of money to do that. And it's like, what was gained? What was gained by spending, I will say, millions of dollars to do something like that, when ultimately, was it really truly needed? Probably not. And we can't go back and fix it now. But,
it was all for the aesthetic.
Yes. And honest to God, a lot of the changes that we do are for the aesthetic. There was a couple buildings where we like raised the roof line, I would say 5 or 6 feet, so that these areas that did not have natural daylight coming in, so that they would have daylight in their workspaces. So that was something that we advocated for, that, again, should that have been millions of dollars? I don't know, was the juice worth the squeeze? But at the same time, someone working in the building where they don't have daylight, when it's just, a regular office building, that really sucks.
One of the things that annoyed me most about working for the military basically was that a lot of the times when we were getting an end user change, it was from someone who was not going to work in that facility. So it felt often like it was a very personal request, and there wasn't that like awareness and perspective of like, by the time this building is done, I'm going to be living somewhere else. Like I'm going to have PCS'd to a different base, and like it won't matter if I have an extra 3 outlets in my office and this and that and the other thing. Like there were so many of those where I was like, why do they care? Like they're not going to be here. But there were a lot of times where like my office didn't have the ability to like kibosh those requests. So we could give our input, but like it was up to somebody else whether those were acceptable or not.
So that's what like makes it difficult about the role that I have, is because it is literally my job to make sure that the Marine Corps voice is heard, and I'm there to be their advocate. And really, there's multiple levels of approvals that have to go through, but really it's me at the ground level trying to convince my boss and their boss and their boss and their boss that yes, we should absolutely spend the money to do something to make a change order on this project. And a lot of times, there were times where things were declined or deemed out of scope, but for the most part, if they were to get to the high level, they would just get approved, which it's also my job to make the problem look like we have the ability to solve it with the least amount of money possible. So, I mean, I had to kind of talk out of both sides of my mouth of, I personally disagree, but it's my job to advocate for you. So I have to. Mm-hmm. And so I find myself in that position a lot.
Is there any part of you that tries to negotiate with the Marine Corps to be like, hey, from my experience of what I know, I don't think this is a good idea? Or are you truly like yes, like I'll back you up. I'm your wingman.
I personally really try to think about, it depends on where we are in the project. If I think it is absolutely critical, and this is me, I was not active duty, this is just me with my knowledge of what these people do and what goes on in that building. If I know for a fact they cannot do something that I think is critical, and that is like, for me to understand something is critical, I mean, that is a bare minimum in my opinion. If I determine that, I am tooth and nail fighting for them because it's really not that big of a request. But I also have a repertoire with a lot of my customers, I'll say that term, that I'll tell them that I really don't think that the juice is worth the squeeze, that I don't think we're going to get buy off. And I lay out every possible scenario before we kind of determine which route we're going to go down. Just being realistic that, if you want to do this, we're going to have to accomplish X, Y, and Z. And I cannot guarantee that Y and Z are going to buy off on what you're selling. I try to be as upfront as possible so that there are no surprises, that when the answer is no, we're going to have to come up with a backup plan for what we're going to do otherwise.
And that probably means so much to your customers as well, like being able to instill that sense of trust and that you do have their back and that, they should take you seriously and like take your opinion seriously.
Yeah, and I feel like that's really difficult to do because obviously I don't have the same understanding as them. Being a young female, I'm, again, not a Marine, and I'm basically saying, like, your request is ridiculous. Like, we cannot do that. Like, who am I to say that? But at the same time, I know enough about the processes that this is not going to fly, or, yeah, we'll push the envelope as far as we possibly can, but we have a lot of constraints to work with. Working for the federal government, there's a lot of hurdles that make things a lot more difficult for seemingly no reason, but it's just because of the fact that everything is auditable, that we really have to have a paper trail of everything that happens. But it's a good accountability tool for everybody involved because, again, it's the taxpayer's dollar at the end of the day.
So, Sam, you asked about, how do you ever push back, or is it you're pretty much just like ride or die? I had planners who had the foresight to say, this is not a good request, this is outside of scope, or this is not something that's worth fighting for. I had other planners who were total yes men for the Marine Corps. They were like, our war fighters need it. And it was like, no, they don't. And meanwhile, on my side of the fence, our direction is no increase in cost, no increase in time. So that's where you run into this like battle where if it's someone saying, hey, something was missed in the design, this is a code requirement, we need to do this, or we need to have a locker room because people are going to be coming in and changing and showering because this is a training facility and that was not included in the design. Like, those are the things that we have to be able to say, like, okay, yeah, this actually is important. But sometimes there were things that it was like, guys, like, are you serious?
My office, unfortunately, is so guilty of this. But it's obviously we have this relationship with, Maggie's former Maggie's former job's office, that we basically had to be like, I'm so sorry to give you this phone call, but we have to push this. And they'll say that they can or they can't, and we're like, we have to get to yes.
Yeah, I had other planners though who didn't make that call. They were just like, hey guys, guess what? The building needs to be 10% bigger. Yeah, that was literally like the mindset of one of my planners, and I could have wrung her neck. Because she was like, Marsoc wants it. And I was like, I don't care what they want right now.
Yeah.
But that was just
I would say, like, them aside, because they are so different than the rest of the
She was like, oh, also, Congress already approved it.
Yeah,
back to the drawing board.
That's a very difficult thing to navigate, of trying to advocate, but really just being like, I really don't think we should be doing this. Like, again, this is last week, okay? We're supposed to turn over a building this week, this actual week. And last week, they're like, we need to make some changes to the AV package. And I'm like, we bought that AV equipment 2 years ago.
Yeah, do it after turnover.
Right. I'm like, sure, there is this window of opportunity for us to do it. But is that really where we should be, putting our resources right now? So I find myself in that situation a lot. It's like, is this really where we want to be putting our resources?
So the reason I say, for those of you out there who don't work in construction, or don't work, it might be specifically for the government, AV is funded by the end user. So does it make sense to delay turnover of a facility to do a change that you're paying for when you could just have the facility turned over to you and then make those changes after the fact? I guess it depends on priorities. So
yeah, well, and the thing about military construction is that it's like this, bright, shiny, free money. It's not something coming out of like our local pockets. And so, for example, like the Marine Corps enterprise-wide pays for these AV packages. So yes, it's paid for by the end user, but it's not coming out of local funds. So to them, it still feels like free money. So they're like, how can we milk this cow in every direction to get as much as we can? But it's like
get every udder.
Right. We have done everything we possibly can. Just because we have $5 in the bank account does not mean we have to spend it, okay? We can just save the $5.
Never. So, we've talked a little bit about the different groups that you coordinate with and the different groups that I, worked with back at the base and all of that. Who would you say is the hardest group to communicate with, and why?
I will say, from like, if I've got my engineer hat on, I would say the hardest group of people to communicate with are people who are very, very, very technical, because obviously my role is not technical in any stretch of the imagination, but I have this unique ability and opportunity to be as technical as I want to be. And so I feel like at times it is very difficult to communicate with people who are in these very technical roles, because I feel like I cannot do them justice to try and reiterate what they're saying, because I don't fully understand it. And sometimes time is of the essence and I really don't have time to get into the weeds. So I feel like that is one of the things that is the most difficult.
If I can just add on to that really quick, I totally understand that. As someone who works in a hospital on the engineering side, we're working with very complex technologies and systems, and trying to then take those highly complex technical aspects of a project and translate them for clinical folks to understand, people who strictly speak medicine, that I can't. Like, I've slowly been learning things over the years of being in healthcare, but it is such a special skill to be able to take those technical things and translate them for other people to not only understand, but also agree with.
I shared a post on LinkedIn back like a month or two ago that was about pretty much that, where technical people often think that the smartest person in the room is the one who knows most. But usually the perception in any room is that the person who can communicate what they're talking about is the smartest person in the room, because they have an awareness. And that is something that a lot of people who are deeply technical are lacking a little bit. is the remembering what the average person doesn't know. Being able to communicate things in a way that anyone can understand instead of trying to sound smart. And that, yeah, that's a huge challenge, is like getting people to break it down to super simple terms, layman's terms, and actually talk about what's needed instead of kind of mushing together a bunch of tech.
Yeah, I feel like I'm in that situation a lot of having to break down things from the technical side and then having to explain that to the Marines themselves and saying, well, we have to spend X number of dollars to do this. And I know that it feels like I'm taking your money to do something, but like if we don't do this, the building will not turn on. Okay, like if we do not like extend this substation and have a new distribution feeder, we cannot turn anything in the building on. Like I know you don't want to spend a couple $1,000,000, but we have to. And that is so, it is a skill. It is a skill, and it's something that I've learned a lot. But again, I'm having to advocate for, telecom drops in ways that I've never thought I would ever be talking about in my life. But it is an opportunity to just be like a sponge, and you just learn way more than you ever could have imagined about electrical engineering or about telecom or mechanical HVAC design. Like it's a very cool place to be because you have all these opportunities kind of without the technical responsibility to make any calls, which is nice.
You get to just say, let me talk to the subject matter expert again.
Right. But I really am trying to use it for my own personal professional development so that I can just be a better engineer, in whatever my career goes into after this.
So let's get a quick rapid fire take from you. Do you agree or disagree that the worst phrase to hear during a project is, we'll figure it out later?
I think that when used correctly can be, like it could be a slam dunk when used correctly, because if it's something that is not possible, perfect. It just wipes off the map.
A de-escalator, if you will.
But when you're in a design review, you should never say, we'll figure it out later.
No, you do not. You do not leave that room until there is an answer.
And it's written down in 4 places.
Because people will forget the moment they walk out of the door that there was ever a conversation ever had when we'll forget about it later, or we'll talk about it later. I think it is very, very risky to say something like that because it could be something super critical to the design, and you won't, like, it will rear its head again. It's just a matter of when. And it's going to cost 10 times more if you do not do it sooner. So I think that it can be a very easy, like, we'll talk about this later, aka never, in a good way. Like, the orientation of the building, that would have been a great time to be like, we'll talk about this later.
We'll talk about this after it's built in the way that it was designed.
Right. But I personally am like, we do not leave the room until we can talk about this, or we're setting up a meeting for like the next day to spend a little bit more time to deep dive. But really we have to do something as quickly as possible so that we do not lose momentum, because we're all going to have competing priorities. That's just the name of the game in project management. You got the next priority of the second, it feels like. So
most professionals aren't formally trained in collaboration. Yet these skills often determine project success, determine personal success. Like I just said, they really kind of exude capability when you are a good collaborator and a good communicator. So Jess, you mentioned that you have a master's in engineering management, but what would you say the balance is between what collaboration skills you learned through that formal education versus on the job?
I feel like, and this could be a hot take, but I feel like there is nothing formal education can do to prepare you for the type of personalities that you are going to encounter in the workforce, especially military personalities. There is nothing in this world that can prepare you for that. I think that the best thing that formal education can get us to do is to get very, very comfortable with public speaking. Engineers, stereotypically are these introverted, math nerds that really can't, look you in the eyes and carry on a conversation or be able to, for lack of a better term, like dumb things down to someone that's not technical. But you have extroverted style engineers, like I would say myself, where you're put in this position where you have the ability to have a regular personal relationship with people, but also have these deep dive technical conversations when needed. And everything is personality based, unfortunately, I feel like, in the workplace and in the workforce in general. So I think it's just a matter of your direct supervisor putting you in situations that you're going to thrive. And now, being a supervisor myself, I really am trying to be more cognizant of, okay, this person is clearly introverted. I do not want them to speak in front of a group full of people. Or this planner is very personally opinionated and wants to say no to everything. But we are in a customer service role, and you cannot say no to everything. So it's like you have to pick people's strong suits to put them in the best place for them to succeed and for the organization to be represented well. So that is something that definitely over the past 5 years, I feel like has totally been on the job training and not formal education.
Yeah, that planner who says no to everything should become a construction manager. No, but I feel the same way. And I think I talked in a previous episode about how I feel the same way about like leadership capabilities. I think that there are certain things you can learn through formal training that kind of hone your leadership abilities. But I think that leadership is something that you're kind of born being able to do or not. Like you're kind of born with that charisma and like draw that makes you able to be a leader, or you're not. And I don't think that there's a script that they can teach you in school that would make people see you as a leader. But yeah, I agree. It's probably a hot take, but I think that there are a lot of things that school cannot teach you.
Maggie, I think you hit it spot on, where it is something that you're kind of born with. But I think part of that too is the experiences. And Jess, you talked about this. It's all about gaining necessary experiences to build on those skills. And if you're a kid who, you grow up and you're constantly given opportunities, like maybe you're part of a sports team and you have to step up in some way, or you're part of these group projects. Like I feel like there are so many opportunities and experience as someone grows up where it is very clear that child will be a leader in the future.
And I feel like for me personally, with this role, I started at this job when I was 23. Essentially, this is my first big girl job. I'm coming in and I don't know the norms of what it's like to be around engineers. I don't know what it's like to be around people in the military. So basically, my advice to myself was, I would give it to anybody, is just sit there and be a sponge for as long as you can get away with, because it will pay dividends just to watch people's social norms and how they interact and what words they choose to say in certain circumstances. Not that it's like team oriented in construction, but it kind of is. Like you're trying to work behind the scenes with fellow people in the government. So you're not showing all your cards to the contractors to see what you can come to a reasonable agreement of what is in their contract already without having to pay any additional money. So, we're having a lot of these strategic meetings behind closed doors, but learning when to say something and when it's not the appropriate time to say something is one of those skills that you really have to be burned a couple of times, and you're like, okay, I know that I cannot say that anymore, but the best piece of advice I can give to someone starting their job is just to sit back, be the wallflower for a little bit, and just watch social norms happening around you, and then you'll kind of be able to grow and see your own confidence in what's happening around you, and get the courage to eventually kind of insert yourself when you know for a fact that something is not necessarily going the appropriate way.
So one tip I saw online once was, when you're in a new place, whether it's in a new job or in a new social group or anything, watch who people kind of gravitate towards, because that'll teach you a lot about the communication styles of the people that you're around and how they respond to criticism, how they respond to new ideas, things like that. Is like to watch who people turn to and watch who people are like trust, so that you can kind of learn how to properly communicate with that group. And then go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, I think very similarly that note about being a wallflower. I don't think that's something that you just have to do at the beginning of your career. I think it's something that you should be conscious and aware of and try to be as much as possible, to Maggie, your point, when you're in new situations or you're meeting new people or working with a different group of stakeholders for the first time. I think there's a lot to be said about someone who comes through the door and like barges in versus someone who coolly comes in, gets to know people, learn about them, and then kind of assert their dominance.
Agreed.
Yes, I definitely have a lot of experiences with both situations, because you can tell when people come in and you know you're not going to be able to get any words out over the top of them, but really try to do the latter, where it's, unless you know for a fact that you are correct, say nothing. There is nothing wrong with saying, let me look into that and I will follow up formally.
And like, if you know that someone is saying something that is wrong, in my opinion, as someone who does tend more towards not like boldly contradicting someone in a meeting, look it up after, confirm, and touch base with them like outside of the meeting and be like, hey, this was wrong. Is this something we need to meet on again? Or if there was someone else who like asked them a question and they answered it wrong, send an email to those people and say, hey, I just need to clarify, this is what's correct. And send like a screenshot of the contract or something and say like, this is what's correct. I think we should meet again to talk about what needs to happen to accommodate this.
I will say, for my role in particular, there have been a couple of instances where really, as the planner, and we're in these, concept design workshops, we're all talking about the design for the very first time. Between the actual designer of record or engineer of record and the base stakeholder that may or may not be an engineer, there are times where it gets really, really contentious between the two. And it's like, I have no idea what HVAC topic you are arguing about, but I know for a fact 2 grown men should not be yelling at each other across the room. So it's also one of those skills that you have to be able to confidently say, hey, I think we just need to take a break for a second. Because ultimately that's kind of my role too. Like, yeah. I am here to kind of coordinate my own stakeholders here at the base, that, we shouldn't be getting into situations like that. But it has happened multiple times. And you really have to, once you learn people's personality, you can kind of predict what's going to happen and try and mitigate as much as you can ahead of time to kind of de-escalate situations like that in the future. But unfortunately, that has happened.
Would you say that particular skill set of mediating with your team of planners, do you think that is a common trait or skill that more of your woman planners have versus your male?
I feel like it's kind of a mixed bag, because I have introverted male planners. Like, I don't want people to default to me as your supervisor to make a decision. I want you to walk in the room and people know that you're the one in charge, and I'm fully here as support. You have to command a room when you need to. I don't want to be the main point of contact. I'm just here as like backup. Like, I will support you in whatever you need, but I don't want to be the default person just because I'm in the room. And I feel like sometimes with my own supervisor, when she's in the room, everybody turns their head to like what she says. Mm-hmm. And I want everyone to have their own sense of ownership. And that's been one thing I've learned a ton about being a supervisor, is kind of giving people the leverage to learn and grow professionally on their own and not take credit for everything, because I don't want it either, share the load.
The amount of HR adjacent personality massaging and de-escalation I've had to do in construction is out of control. Like, there is so much of that, like massaging egos and like trying to like de-escalate conflict without pissing anyone off even further. It's insane. And like, you don't ever learn that. You're not ever taught that. Of course, there's like conflict resolution, trainings and things like that, and communicating like difficult conversations and all of that. But there are so many situations that you could never predict. And you just have to roll with it and like figure out how to make it work.
Yeah, the amount of impact of personalities in construction is, you would never believe. You would never believe the amount of stuff that is not able to get accomplished timely just because two people cannot sit in a room together. I'm talking like probably every project that I've worked on, there becomes a point of contention. Like there have been times where there was a construction manager, also a woman, very, very strong personality, been in the industry for a long time. Here I am, my second week on this project, and I'm like, hey, let's discuss X, Y, and Z. And she says, that's not your job. And it's like, well, it's my job in other projects, so I'm a little bit confused. Like, let's sit down and talk about it. And she didn't know how to not be abrasive because, again, in the construction industry, you're working with a lot of men. But I'm like, as a woman, I'm not expecting you to be soft, but I'm like, hey, we're on the same team here. Like, we don't have to be so aggressive.
Yeah.
We can just talk.
Sam and I have talked about that a little in the past, where like sometimes people bring it too far, and that she and I have sometimes noticed ourselves taking on a few too many, like one of the guys or masculine or like borderline aggressive traits in order to try to be more successful or part of the team or things like that. Mm-hmm. And it's a tough balance. And there are some women who are, older, so they've been in the industry longer, who didn't have the resources and the community that we have. And so they've become so hardened that it is abrasive and it is too much, because it just feels disrespectful and like it doesn't garner the respect that they want it to.
Yeah, I think that's kind of my perspective. Is I'm all about, give you the same energy you're giving me, but at the same time, like, we're in a professional workplace. Like, you don't actually know me personally. I know that I don't deserve to be talked to in that way. I'll let you get it out, but at the end of the day, like, come on, like, we are a professional working environment, and I know what the hell I'm talking about. You know what I mean?
To continue the conversation from before, we've talked a lot about some of the experiences that you've had with difficult customers, difficult stakeholders, but what is one instance of collaboration that you're really proud of?
So I feel like it's when we're all truly working for the same goal and it's apparent. We had this one change order that somehow got missed in design. There's nothing we can do about it in construction. And we're meeting on site pretty much every day because we're winding down on the project and this absolutely has to be done. And so we start giving every course of action that's possible. And we basically start going down all three at once because we have no idea which one's going to work out. And it ended up working out that they had all of the material already on hand to do it. And that one change is going to have a lasting impact on like what that building does for my entire career. I feel like, until things change in 5 years and technology outgrows.
Until they demo the building in 5 years.
Right. But it's one of those things that it's like, wow, like an instance where we could all come together for a mission that is so much bigger. And I think that is one of the really validating things about working for the military, is what I do on a day-to-day basis impacts these Marines to do missions, whether that be forward deployment and they're out in the middle of the ocean 9 months every other year, or preparing them prior to deployment, or it's just, hey, this is where they're going to do their court proceedings, for a speeding ticket. Anything like that is having a direct impact on a Marine's life every day. And so when we have a big win like that, to pull something off from the engineering side, that, hey, we have the material where we can actually accomplish it in a different way instead of spending 4 times as much to have the contractor do it. I would say that's probably been one of my bigger wins
And what would you say the biggest lesson is that working across disciplines has taught you?
I would say going into interdisciplinary engineering, you just need to humble yourself that you are not the smartest person in the room. And that's okay. We all have our roles in projects specifically, and it's okay to not know everything that there is to know about HVAC. You just have to be able to do the work to properly advocate for whoever you're advocating for, and to the extent that you feel comfortable, but just coming from a very humble standpoint when you're coming into situations really kind of sets the tone that you're really not trying to speak for people.
Yep. So Jess, you and me working in the construction industry, there are infinite things that
Yeah.
are happening. And Sam working in hospitals, like none of us will ever know everything there is to know about anything, because the fields we work in are very, very complex. And that's the reason that we have subject matter experts. So I totally agree with you, Jess. You got to humble yourself. You have to say, I can learn something from anyone. That's been the biggest thing that has, I think, brought me the success that I have so far in my career, is being willing to learn something from anyone.
And
Even someone who is a little dumb. They know something that you don't know.
That's true.
I think that's such a blessing that we get to work in these careers where I love that I can go to work every day and learn something new that I didn't know before. And it's, if you have that mindset of, I want to learn for the rest of my life, these are the types of jobs and careers that I think would really fit that mindset. And I wish everyone had that mindset, honestly.
Agreed.
Right. Like my experience to date has given me opportunities to kind of like learn a little bit about each type of engineering. But it's so interesting to see, like, over time, we could be talking about the same stormwater pond over a history of 3 years. And it's very interesting to hear different perspectives depending on the situation about how they would answer. Like 1 year ago, the answer was absolutely not. We're not doing that as a solution. But now that it's failed 2 more times, it's like, okay, now we're back to that original solution, because we kind of have to come up with an engineering solution here. Obviously, it's not my role to say what we're going to do, but to try and gather as much information as I can to help everyone make an educated decision moving forward is kind of really my role.
So, Jessica, thank you so much for joining us. I always love hearing your takes on stuff, and you're super, super, super knowledgeable. And I am so grateful to have you as a friend and as a, professional contact. Thank you so much, Jess, for joining us. We loved talking to you today. We always love having a guest on, and this season we have been full of good guests. I loved talking about collaboration. It's something that, Sam and I both hold near and dear to our hearts. It's what we do all day, every day, pretty much. And it's good to hear from somebody else who also does interdisciplinary collaboration. Yes.
I was going to say thanks for having me, you guys.
You're welcome, Jess. You were great to have on.
Yes, you were.
So thank you to everyone for listening today or watching. If you haven't yet, follow us on Instagram at Not So Civil Pod. If you're interested in being a guest for an episode, send us an email at notSoCivilEngineers@gmail.com. All of our episodes go up on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. So again, thank you all so much for being great listeners, and we will talk to you soon. Remember, keep it civil.
At least a little.